Hi, everybody. I'm Ben Sweetser, a senior curriculum developer with ServiceNow, and want to welcome you to today's session, Assets and Models and CIs. Oh my! We're going to talk about asset management and a little bit of configuration management and how model management supports those processes. I am going to go ahead and start my screen sharing now, and then we'll kick things off. All right, so welcome to today's Ask the Experts session. Ask the Experts session. Doesn't roll off the tongue as nicely as I'd like sometimes. And really my goal today, I see a lot of questions and I receive a lot of questions about asset management and what is the difference between an asset and a configuration item, and why do I need two separate records for these things? So if you leave today's session with a better understanding of how these items relate and how models also fit into this picture, then I will consider this session to be a success. What we're going to cover is we're going to start off with a quick overview of asset and configuration management and how they tie together. Then we'll look at assets, CIs, and models and what they are and how they contribute to these different processes. And we'll look at assets and CIs and how they get linked together, because they sometimes, you could think of them almost as two sides of the same coin when you're working with both. But there are situations when you only need one versus the other, and we'll talk about that. And then we'll add in models and look at how models can support both of these different areas. And then at the end, or even throughout as we are going through today, feel free to add your questions right into the community page where you're probably watching this session, and we'll answer the questions. If you're watching the recording, you can also add the questions, add your questions there, and I will be monitoring and answering questions as they come in. So hopefully we can get your answers, get you answers for the questions that you have, and you won't be able to stump the chump. Me being the chump, of course. And also your expert. So just to quickly introduce myself, I am Ben Sweetser, curriculum developer and technical trainer with ServiceNow. Been with the company for almost 4 years now, and I wrote the book on asset management, or at least the ServiceNow training book on asset management. I have over 16 years experience in the industry, and with our asset management course that I wrote, I have delivered also over 20 times since the first version of the course. I am active in the ServiceNow community, so feel free to connect with me on the community. If you've got specific asset questions, I do watch for those, but if you think I may have an answer for you, feel free to tag me as well. And if you'd like to connect via Twitter or LinkedIn, those are my handles there, so feel free to reach out. Do let me know in LinkedIn how you found me, so I don't think it's just a random connection coming in. I do like to know how people are looking to connect and why they're looking to connect with me. So just let me know that you saw me on the Ask the Expert session when you try to connect. So why do we do asset management? Isn't it just inventory? Isn't it just a matter of knowing what you've got? Little things like how much you paid for it? It's just a list, right? Well, not really. Asset management is more important than that. It's often thought to be this sort of technical issue where you need to just discover what you've got and have that list of what you've got. But it's not. It's more of a business issue. It's really about stewardship of the asset over its life cycle. So from early on, when you first get that asset, that resource, and understanding all of the financial and contractual aspects related to that item as it pertains to your environment. So that's what it amounts to. Well, where does this life cycle start that you're stewarding? It can start as early as the request for that item, And there are benefits to thinking about the asset lifecycle as starting at that request rather than just when you procure, which is what a lot of people say. Well, when I receive it, that's really when the asset lifecycle starts. But if you think about it as starting from the request phase, then you're controlling what people order to make sure that they align with the assets that you manage within your environment. And it also has some additional benefits along the lines of allowing you to identify, well, do I need to procure new items, new assets, or do I already have some of these existing in stock? So if that asset lifecycle starts here, it has that additional benefit of allowing you to more easily leverage what you've got in stock instead of going out and procuring new items and receiving them and then taking them into stock. Now there's going to be a point when you're going to deploy those assets and put them into use within your environment. While they're out there, you'll monitor them, support them. You may have some move, adds, and changes. Normally you would see this as IMAC, install, move, add, change. But we cover that install here with deploy. So we just list it here in this life cycle diagram as MAC, or move, add, change. And then eventually that asset, through moves, add, changes, it may be put back into stock and go through this in-use phase again, or it will eventually be disposed of or retired. This blue oval over the life cycle, over the asset's life cycle, represents that point in time when that asset is in use. And at that point, you're typically tracking that item as a configuration item in your environment. So a lot of the typical things you might think of as assets, like computers, would go through this overall life cycle. And for this point that's highlighted by this blue oval, that would be where you would track them as a configuration item. And then it comes back out to more of an asset tracking task when it gets to that retirement phase of the process. So this is where we've got asset and configuration management interacting. Now let's consider that computer. Let's think about it. Well, what do you need to track about this laptop? Say we had this HP laptop and we needed to track some information about it. You might be thinking some different items. I'll give you a moment to pause and consider what types of information you want to track. Maybe you want to write it down on a sheet of paper, or the hard thing here with the Ask the Expert being interactive. So you might be thinking of some things like, oh, I want to know how much RAM is in this system, or I want to know what the manufacturer and model is for this. I want to know how much it cost, and the serial number, perhaps the software that's installed to this system, what the warranty expiration is. From a very basic standpoint, what is it, who has it, and where is it? So there are a number of different pieces of information. And if I bring those up, we've got some different items here. The cost, the serial number, the asset tag, who uses it, where is it, manufacturer model, and then some of those operating details. If we look at this type of information, I've got it broken up purposely here. This information over on the left is really asset type details. So for those items in our environment where we want to track things like the cost, the warranty expiration, or the contractual information, we're going to want asset records for those items. Over here on the right, we've got those operational or configuration details. What operating system is it running? That's operational information that can change when you deploy that asset into use. It might have Windows 7 at some point. You might put a Linux operating system on it. That's information that can change. Same with the memory. You might install more RAM into the system. The software installations on that computer, they're going to change throughout the life of that device. But that's information that's important from an operational standpoint. And so we track that in config management versus asset management. Now I've got who uses it and where is it in italics here, because that's information that's really important, both from the asset management perspective and the configuration management perspective. And it's specific to those individual devices that you have out in your environment. And that's actually information that we put in both places. So you'll see it in both config management, CI records, configuration item records, and asset records. In the middle, we've got this other information. What is it? Manufacturer, the model of the device. We might even include some other information like what's the form factor, or what's the end of life, or what's our expected life cycle for this type of device. And this is information that doesn't make sense to store in an asset record or configuration item record. So instead, we store it in a model record. And this is information that we can use and reference from both the configuration items and the asset records. So I kind of covered each of those different types of items through that slide, but let's break it out and let's look at each of these different items. We've got our assets, we've got our CIs, we've got our models. What are they really? And then we'll get into a little demonstration of them as well. So when you think about assets in your environment, it's probably one of the first things that come to your mind, at least for me, is, well, the computers, the hardware that we've got in our environment. Whether that's the end user devices like laptops or servers, or even tablets and phones, network switches and routers, printers, any type of device like that, things that are contributing to a service. We might also have software licenses. So when it comes to software, what you really purchase, what the asset is the software license that you purchase. Not that CD, not the media, not the digital download of the software. It's the actual license to use that software that you've purchased. And so those software licenses are your assets. And there may be other things that you consider to be assets in your environment, such as buildings, facilities. If you work with facilities, you might consider things like the heating, ventilation, air conditioning, HVAC systems to be assets that you need to track from a contractual or a financial standpoint. And what this really gets down to, and what people need to consider in your environments, is what types of information do we need to track about these items? And you use that to determine whether or not you should have an asset or CI record or both in your environment. And what it boils down to, what it comes down to simply is, if you need to track financial information for an item, if you need to track contractual information about an item, or life cycle details, is it in stock? Do we have some of it in stock? What relationships do we have? Did we purchase or did we lease these items together so they need to be returned together? So there's that sort of life cycle relationship from a financial standpoint there on the lease. If you need to track those types of information about an item, then you want to have an asset record for it. If you need to track logical information about that item, information like what software is installed, what are the hardware details that we need to have available to us if we need to troubleshoot this thing, what types of logical relationships do we have for this item in our environment? If we've got a business service, which is strictly a configuration item because it's a logical entity, we want to know what applications, what servers, what application servers, what databases, what storage make up that business service, so we can identify and easily troubleshoot things when we need to work on tasks around those items. And that comes down to task tracking. So if we need to open up incidents, problems, changes on items, then we need a configuration item record for that so that we can be able to track that. So we've got our operational details, software installations and such. If we need all of this information, any or all of this information, then we are going to have a configuration item for that resource in our environment. Again, the financial information, contractual information, that's when we need to have the asset record. Not everything in the environment is both of these. And that's why these things are separated out, and why we don't just track asset information on a CI. And years ago, before, in fact, when I first started with ServiceNow, the asset information was just fields on the CI, but we've grown, and now we have them separate. So some examples of when you might have an asset but not a configuration item. Software license is a great example of that. You don't have a configuration item for the software license that you've purchased. You actually, for software asset management, track that software license information, which is the asset, in conjunction with those operational details of the software installations to determine whether you're compliant for that software. Another good example of something that you may have as an asset in your environment, but not as a configuration item, would be perhaps a multifunction device like a printer, fax, copy machine, one of those big machines in your environment. I've worked with a lot of companies who lease those, and they're not tracking any kinds of relationships on those items. They're not opening incidents directly on them. End users don't call IT to support them. There's a number right on the device, and they'll call Xerox or Canon or whichever company's providing that device for the actual support. But in this case, they want to track the financial information. How much are we paying for that? Or contractual information. We're leasing that multifunction device. So we need to have an asset record for it so that we can track those details. But we don't need the configuration item for tracking the specifics. On the other side of things, we might have items that we want to track as CIs, but not as assets. Some good examples there might be bring your own device or contractor devices within your environment. If contractors bring in their own devices but run your company software, you need to capture those software installations so that you can properly do software asset management. But because you don't own that device, you don't need to track those devices as assets. You just need the CI information for those items. Business services are another example where you don't have associated assets specifically because it's a logical entity. Now, supporting each of these is the model record. And really, you're going to have a model record any time that you have an asset or configuration item to provide that foundational data. And we'll look at models and how they provide even more than just a foundational set of information for assets and CIs and what else they do in just a little bit. But let's take a quick look at some asset records, the details, and how they're linked within the environment. I'm going to do a quick check also on the community page to see if any questions have come in while I've been presenting. Okay, nothing yet. So we'll go back here. So I've gone into my asset records here. I've got some hardware assets within my environment, and I can look at the details for an asset record. I can see my hardware assets. I'm going to collapse that so we can see some more of the details. So here I can see that I've got a model category for this asset. It's a computer. It's model. It's a Hewlett-Packard EliteBook 850 Generation 2. I can hover over that and see more details if I want. Now, interestingly enough, we can see on this model record I've got some attachments there. I'll show you what that's all about when we discuss models a little more. And we can see the important asset-related information listed here. Well, what's the state of this item? Well, it's in stock and available. What stock room is it in? If I were to put this item into use, Notice that the stockroom field goes away and is replaced with an assigned to field where we can identify who's using it. And so we could identify who's using this particular device. Perhaps it's Daryl Emmerich. And the location, when I'm in the form here, automatically gets set to Daryl Emmerich's location from his user record. So it makes it easier for us to keep track of where our assets are as well. Our configuration item, now that we've put this into use, I'll go ahead and save this record. Now that we've put this item into use, it may be picked up by Discovery. And so there is an associated configuration item that I just navigated to simply by clicking on that reference icon. And now I'm in the CI record. Now Discovery may come in at this point now that the item's in use, and it may update some of the information that we see in this record, such as the operating system, the RAM, and other details that will come in and help us out. Notice that model ID is listed there. And if we click on that reference icon, we can go to the model record where we can see some specifics about this particular model of device. So we've got our asset, we've got our CI, and we've got our model record. The model's got some additional details. We can see all of the assets based on this model, all the configuration items based on this model, all detailed for us right here within this model record. All right. Let's take a look at a couple of other things about how these assets and CIs are related. So I'm going to just pop back to PowerPoint for a moment to introduce this, and then we'll do a little demonstration of it. So configuration items and assets. How do we make that link? I just showed you an asset record that was already pre-created, and it had a corresponding configuration item record. And you'll be happy to know, particularly if you've worked with other systems and had to spend a lot of time integrating them to get assets and CI records communicating and synchronizing, because we're on a single platform in ServiceNow, these things work natively together. And so that you can make that link between a CI and an asset, we've just got a special item called a model category, where you identify within that model category what's the CI class that should be connected to an asset class, if there even is one. So let's take a look at the model category for computer. If we've got, if we create a new CI that's part of the CI class, computer CI class, that computer CI class is associated with the computer model category. And ServiceNow knows to create a corresponding hardware asset for that. And from that point on, after this initial creation, that CI and that asset are linked. And you'll have that reference between them. Vice versa, that model category can go the other way. So if you created the asset first, you get that new asset. It's part of the hardware class. Now, interestingly enough, with asset classes, we can associate that same asset class to multiple model categories. So we identify specifically on the asset, what is the model category? And we would identify this as being a computer. And then the computer CI would be created, and you'd have that link between your new asset and your new CI. What does that mean from an overall process perspective? Well, let's take a look at that asset lifecycle again. Many companies, when they first start out doing asset management, they're going to start by looking at Discovery as an initial source for generating and creating those asset records. But we're not going to create those asset records directly, because Discovery and the types of information that it discovers are really operational details. So what we'll do, discovery or your discovery source that you may be working with Microsoft System Center Configuration Manager, Altiris, HP Client Automation, or Server Automation. There are a number of tools out there that you could use as a discovery source. And what they're going to do is they're going to identify resources that are live in your environment, and they'll create that CI record. And when that CI record is created, it's going to identify with some sort of CI class, and through that model category, it'll create a corresponding asset. So then you'll get your full asset record for tracking the life cycle, and then your procurement sources will update those asset records within the environment. So based on serial number, most likely, because that's often something that can be discovered that you can then coalesce or update those asset records with. That will automatically update with the asset details. And as you progress and as you become, as you start working with asset management more and procurement of the devices in your environment, you may see a shift where procurement really becomes your main source for creating these items. And so then those asset records are created, and then what happens is discovery comes in. After the asset creates the asset record and the CI record, discovery will come in and then update the CI record with its corresponding details, such as RAM and installed software. Rather than creating a new record, again, it would update that CI record that was created from the asset that was created from the procurement source. Let's take a look at this. So let's go with the first model. I'm not going to perform a discovery here, but what I will do is I'm going to create a new computer. And I will just call it David's computer. I'm going to give it an asset tag, ask the expert 1001. Actually, I'm going to leave that asset tag off. This is what I wanted. Serial number, ask the expert 1001. I'm going to give it a model ID. I'm going to go with a Hewlett-Packard G2, but I want to make sure that I'm getting the correct G2, so I'm going to 850. I'm going to go with the 27, and I'm going to assign this to David Liu. And then we might have other details that were discovered. We might find that that he's running really old Windows XP Pro still on this computer. Got special dispensation, maybe 8,000 megabytes of RAM, and so on. So a number of pieces of information would be discovered about this device. And then we save it, and you'll see that an asset record was created, a corresponding asset record was created. And this was simply, again, based on the model category. If I come out here, I go to Product Catalog, where the model categories are, I'm going to just drag this over to my edge, and I'm going to hold down Command button so it pops up as a flyout. If we go to Computer, here we can see it's making that connection between our computer CI class and the hardware asset class. So it created a hardware asset for us. And so I have that information there where it created the asset. Now we're not going to want to go into each of our assets and update with all of those asset details. what we may be doing is importing details from a procurement system, or first from information perhaps sent to us from our vendor that we used to procure that device. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to simulate that with an import set. I'm going to load some data here. I'm going to use an existing table. I've already got this set up in my environment, so you don't have to watch me go through the process of creating an import transform map. And I'm just going to bring in my assets. I've got a spreadsheet from my vendor or my procurement source. I'm going to submit that. And then I'm going to run the transform on this. Looks like some questions are starting to flow in. I'll take a look at those in just a moment. Okay, so I've just brought in my import map. I'm going to go back to my computer. And the name was David's computer. I'm going to go into David's computer here. And you'll see something interesting happen. First of all, that the asset now has an asset tag associated with it. The import was set to coalesce, is set to merge the asset information based on the serial number. And if we go to the asset record, then we've got some additional details. We can see that it's in use. We can see on the financial tab that cost was brought in as well. So we have some details that have been brought in about this asset and updated. Notice I had the assign to set to David Liu originally, but we, in our procurement details, thought that the assign to was going to be Amelia Caputo. So that might be something left that we need to investigate. All right, now before we get a little more technical on this, we've got some questions coming in. I want to make sure to address those. Because of discovery, VMs are added as servers, which automatically get added to assets. Should you set the model for the OSs to not create an asset? Enforce CI creation checkbox on model category. Let's address that first one. I would say no on that one, and I'll show you an alternate method for dealing with that rather than not to create an asset. Well, actually, you could for VM models. So you could actually set that on the VM model, and let's take a look at that quickly. So the question that's being brought up is around what happens if I don't want to create that associated, that corresponding asset, even though it's got some information based on it. We have a couple of different ways to handle that. And the question actually asks about one of those, which is on the model record. So I'm going to collapse all of these. Within the model record, I'm not sure I've got a VM model in this environment, so let me just do a quick check to see if I do. No, I don't. But let's take a look at the example. Maybe we've got a model of device that we know we don't purchase in our environment, so we don't want to automatically create assets when those items are discovered. So maybe we know we don't purchase Dells. And what this question is asking about is on the VM model, the VM hardware model that's created, could I just set that asset tracking strategy to don't create assets? Absolutely. Now I could do it here. If I know I don't purchase this particular type model of device, I can tell it to not create assets as well. So VMware is a good example of that. So virtual machines, to make sure that those don't have associated assets created for them. Or for systems that you don't purchase. You may choose to do that as well. So if you've got contractors bringing in a particular model of device, or a bring your own device policy set up, and your end users are bringing in devices, then you may choose to set that asset tracking strategy to don't create assets. Then there was another question here. Enforce CI creation checkbox on the model category level. Do you find that people use this, and what could be some of the business processes that would support. So that was actually where I was going to go next. I'm going to just leave that page. I don't need to worry about that on the model category. I'm going to go to my computer. And so what this question is referencing is this option to enforce CI verification. This is actually an option that I recommend setting on your model category, perhaps even up front before you do a lot of discovery in your environment, because it'll give you a lot more flexibility when it comes to identifying the CIs that should be assets in your environment. Let me get that out of there. So if we have enforced CI verification checked here, I'm going to update this. What's going to happen now is if I go to computers, Discovery comes in and finds a new computer. Make it Amelia's computer. And we'll we've got a model ID here. I'm going to go with that same one I chose before, and we'll make it Amelia Caputo's. I'm going to just save this instead of hitting update. There are a couple of things that are different now that I've got enforced CI verification turned on. One is that there's no asset. No asset was automatically created here. And up top here, I have two new options. I can create an asset, or I can merge the CI. So this gives me some flexibility here that allows me to create the asset on demand for these items that have been discovered in my environment, which is essentially verifying that I do in fact want to create an asset for this item. Or if for some reason this discovered item didn't line up, if maybe the serial number that was imported from the procurement process was just a little off, or whatever information your discovery source is using to merge the record didn't match up quite right, you can use this merge CI option to help you out. So in this case, I may have updated this. I'll actually show you quickly that I'm going to go drag my hardware assets over here, and I'm going to open it up in a flyout. If I add on my serial number field here, I'm just going to pop it right up next to my asset tag. Notice my serial number on this computer that was discovered matches the serial number that I've already got for this asset. And this asset's going to already have a corresponding configuration item that you can see listed there. So I could choose to merge this CI. I'll look up using the list so that I can filter on it a little better. I'm going to just add the serial number. Probably want to display the serial number if I'm going to do that. Oops. Serial number is expert 1002 on that, and let's merge with this CI. So we're going to merge this with an existing CI. We'll OK that, and now we've merged that discovered CI with the CI that was created from our discovery source. And that enforced CI verification allows for that. It also allows for that situation where we want to be a little pickier and we want to make sure we're identifying the CIs that we want to create assets for. I'm going to create one more CI here just to show you. It's going to be Beth's computer. I'm going to go with that same model. We'll make it England's. And when I save here, it's going to not create the asset, and I have that create asset button. But if you, over time, you might discover a lot of items, and you don't want to have to go into each individual record here to create the asset. So what you can do is you can have a report, or you can have a list where take this field. This is what the field that it uses to identify the CIs that need to be verified to create their assets. And if we say requires verification is true and run this, we get a list of just those new CIs that have been discovered that require verification. And if we had a larger list here, it would be a little more impressive looking. But we can choose right from the list. We can select the items that we want to verify and have it create assets for them all at once, for all of the selected items. So we can do that. That item's no longer requiring a verification. Come back out here. The ones that have Beth's computer, now listed here, now has a corresponding asset. So that requires and for CI verification gives us some flexibility there with regards to when to create assets from our CIs. And that is set on the model category. So model category is very important. Model category makes that link between your CI classes and your asset classes, so you don't need to do a lot of coding and scripting or anything like that over days and days of work to get your assets and CIs working. Isn't the assumption that VMs only need to be part of the software licenses? The VMs aren't part of the software license. The software license records are simply assets. So in terms of using information from a virtual machine to support software asset management, because you need to make sure you've got enough software licenses to cover the software that you're running on those devices, you just need the operational information. So you just need the CI record, which would have the associated software installations, which are required for software asset management. I created Beth's computer here by hand, so we don't see any software installations. But that operational information is what's used to determine software license compliance for software asset management. If you worked previously with a system that was strictly asset management, then you would see that need for having assets for those items, because you'd need to have them in the asset management system for tracking that. Because we're taking care of both the configuration and asset management aspects natively, we can do that all in one system here without having to confuse the issue of VMs needing assets. The situation where you would want to have your VMs to have asset records is if you were doing something financial with them. Perhaps you're doing chargebacks to a cost center or department for using those virtual machines. You could then look to create asset records for those virtual machines to support that purpose. So these are questions coming in right from the Hangout. Let me do a quick refresh to see if there are any questions coming in on the website as well. Notice I list the CPU name in the model short description. Our models created by Discovery contain computers with varying CPU names such as i5 and i7. Should Discovery be creating separate models for those? That's a good lead-in to the discussion on models in just a little bit, so I'm going to table that question momentarily. Recommendation on tracking virtual servers: don't create an asset and only create a CI and expose the install status field. Yeah, when it comes to virtual servers, sorry for that standard answer of it depends, but it does depend on what makes sense for your environment. If you do need to track the financial aspects for those virtual servers, then you may want to create an asset for tracking things like the chargebacks on that. But if you strictly need information for software asset management in relationship to those virtual servers, then just work with the CI records for that, and install status would be fine for that, yes. Recommendations on tracking mobile phones and tablets. Create both an asset and CI, potentially extend communication table, create a mobile phone table and tablet table. I would, from an asset perspective on this, what you'll find is you'll notice that when we look under asset management here, there are very few asset classes. We've got hardware license, which is our software license. We've got a special type of asset called a consumable, things that you're really tracking in quantity instead of individual items. And then from a configuration management perspective, we get really down into the details. We've got Linux, we've got Windows, we've got Unix, we've got printers, we've got network gear. So from a configuration perspective, yes, you might look to create that, and that's exactly what you're saying, extending communication to support the mobile phones and tablets, but still using the asset hardware class. So yes, that is a potential way to handle that situation. It comes down to what level of detail. Are people opening up incidents on these things? Then yes, definitely track those that way. Are you tracking them as individual assets in your environment? If you're doing that, then yes, that would be a good way to do that. If you are instead looking at these things, that whether it's based on cost and the tablets are cheap enough that you don't consider them to be a full-fledged asset, some companies track those tablets just as consumables, and so they put them out. If somebody has an issue, they just swap out the tablet, provide a new one to the user, and track that the user's got it, but they're not opening up an incident directly against the tablet for that. From a mobile phone standpoint, whether or not you track that as a hardware asset in your environment depends on whether the company's paying for it or not. In ServiceNow, we employees buy our own phone, but the company pays for the contract. So ServiceNow, in that scenario, would not have a hardware asset for those phones. We would instead, the company would just track the associated contracts, perhaps with the user associated with that contract. So hopefully that answered that question. I'll go back through and answer the questions posted within the community as well in text. Operating information, RAM, CPU, should be located on the CI, not the asset. From our understanding, the CI is showing the computer's configuration in real time of discovery. Our organization frequently adds components to a computer. Sure. So if the CI shows the lifetime configuration, 8 gigs, since you added 4 additional rather than the original configuration of the computer, would it make sense to show the original form factor on the model and then carry that information over? Yeah, that's exactly right in terms of the setup. And that's another good lead-in to the model discussion. So Ryan, you're getting into the to good model discussion. How do you suggest we note the original form factor of a machine versus what discovery? I I think of form factor more not as the initial configuration, which would identify the default RAM in the system. The model would identify the default RAM, but the form factor is really more along the lines of is it a server? Is it a tower? Is it a notebook? Is it a tablet? So when I think of form factor, that's what I think of. You could even have a form factor for a virtual machine if you wanted to use that as a means for weeding that out. Let's get into a quick introduction of the model information, as that's a good lead into that discussion. Actually, before we get into the models, just quickly with regards to the asset and configuration, something that you need to determine for your organization is what is an asset, what is a configuration item, or what's going to be both in your environment, or what do you not want to track at all. So look at those items and go back to that slide, that deciding slide that I had earlier. Do we need to track financial or contractual information about this item? If so, then we need an asset record for it. Do we need to track operational or logistical or relationship information? Are we going to open up tasks against these items? Then we need a CI. And if it's true for both, then it's true for both. And then you can set up your model categories to support that. Keep non-asset CIs out of asset management. That comes down to things like contractor devices or business services or bring your own devices. Possibly virtual machines within your environment. Keep those out of asset management unless you have a particular need to do that, to work with that. Make sure you've got a CI for any supportable asset in your environment. So that question about tablets came up that I worked through. If you tracked those items as consumables, you wouldn't really be tracking associated corresponding CIs with those. So not only make sure any supportable asset has a CI record, but make sure you're not tracking those supportable items as consumables. If it's important enough for you to have a configuration item for it, then it's important for you enough for you to track it individually as an asset tagged asset. And then ensure those asset records in the CMDB stay in sync. Hey, we're doing that for you automatically by making that link for you. So let's get into those models. So models are providing some foundational information that we can use. And it comes down to a default configuration as well. Because these models that we're working with, they're not only supporting asset management and configuration management, but they can also support our service catalog. And we can create service catalog items directly from these models. And that's where that short description can come into play. We can create vendor catalog items from these things as well. And then it comes down to, where do I get this model information? Well, Ryan was talking about Discovery's not really going to put in that short description information very well. If it puts in anything, it's not going to necessarily be the type of description that you want. But Discovery could be a source for that model information. You may be able to get that model information for the models that you purchase from your vendors. So check with your vendors. They might be able to provide a listing of the hardware devices that they provide you with the specific information. And you could import that information into the model table to support the asset management work that you're doing, and even the configuration management. You may look to manually create some of this information. So particularly when it comes to software models, you might create software models directly from the software discovery models. But that's a deep topic that gets into a lot of detail down the line. Or you may work with a ServiceNow partner. There are a number of partners out there that provide model databases that you could leverage, like Snow Software, BDNA, Flexera. There are a number of partners out there that do provide this type of information. They sometimes even provide enrichment information that you wouldn't get without doing a lot of research on your own, such as what's the end of life date on this particular model. If you don't want to have to hunt that information down yourself, you could work with a ServiceNow partner that provides that type of enrichment information. So let's take a look quickly at the model information. I was working with, we've been looking at an Elite book here. I'm just going to show you some of the details. I have a series of blog posts on the community about model management and why it's important. So I know we're getting up close to the top of the hour here. I'm happy to stay a little longer to answer questions, but I'll post some additional links to the event page on the website with some more details, such as the model management. When it comes to model management, though, what we can do here is we can add details that can help us support things from an asset management perspective or a configuration management, operational perspective. So here on this model record, I've got some attachments, like the service guide for this HP Elite book. So rather than having to go to a website and hunt down the service guide, I can attach this service guide directly to the model, so I have it available to me if I need to reference that for troubleshooting. So I've created, if I had an incident, we opened up an incident against David's computer, trouble with the monitor. We'll say that the caller is David Liu, even though we saw that it was reassigned to Amelia. I'm going to save this. Now, as the technicians working on this ticket, they could go into the CI and they could go right to the model record for details to access the service guide, and then they could save it and open it. And now they have access to that maintenance and service guide readily available to them without having to do a lot of research online to find that information. We've got some other details here. Depreciation, we could have that form factor set up. We could create fields to support what our life cycle is, so that when new assets are created from these items, then they can automatically be set with a scheduled retirement date that you can use to make sure you're keeping up with your asset refresh and see that these items are being refreshed on a timely basis and in a manner that helps keep your users productive. Down below here, we can see, oh, actually, before we get down there, we've got our product catalog. This lets us know how it'll display in our service catalog. So I've already published this item to the service catalog, and so it's already available for me there to see. All I had to do was click a related link down here to publish it to the hardware catalog. And below here, I can also see the vendors that I can purchase this from. So I can see that I can purchase this particular laptop from Amazon and CDW. If you're not seeing that immediately, it's just because it's in the name that I'm looking, and I know where to look. If I hovered over this, I might see it a little better. I can see the vendor is Amazon and the vendor is CDW. What does this look like when you go through the process? Because we've got a model set up here, because this model is tied into our assets that we have in the environment, including in-stock assets, when I go through the catalog process to purchase this, all right, EliteBook 850 G2, I can choose to order. I'll order a couple of them. I'm going to order it now. Now the procurement person, when they go through the process to fulfill this request, they can go to their dashboard here, their procurement dashboard, They can see requests that require sourcing. In this particular case, the default is over $1,000, and this was over $1,000, so it requires some approvals. I'm going to just override the approval here so we can continue on with the demo. We now have a catalog task associated with this overall request, and this is to source the requested items. And when I choose to source this, when I go into this task, there is a button here to source the request. It lets me choose where I want the request to go. I'm going to go to my San Diego border pickup and drop off. And I can see when I select this under transfer order from stockroom, I can see whether I've got any in stock, because the procurement is now tied in with the asset management through that model record. I can see I've got one in stock in my San Diego South warehouse. I also have one in stock in my Southern California warehouse. I will select to get one from there, and I'll OK. I'm going to source request. I'm going to go to that same San Diego border pickup and drop off. Now I've only got one left because the one in that other stock room is set to be in transit. This time I'm going to choose to create a PO so that you can see that. And here I can see the vendors that I can get this from. It does automatically create a vendor for the manufacturer of the device, which you may or may not actually purchase from. And I could choose to order from Amazon. If we don't want to create a purchase order individually for each item, we could choose to consolidate purchase orders, which will take purchase orders created from multiple requests and create a single purchase order for them. So if you want to make one order, that can come in very handy. And I'll hit OK here to source that from my vendor. And it lets me know a purchase order was created. I am still on the catalog task. I'm going to just update this to go out to the request again. And here on the request, we can see the transfer orders and the purchase orders. At this point, I could go through and tie it in. That gets into the more than we really want to discuss here for today's discussion on the CIs and the assets and the models. If you're interested in that, happy to put together something or show you that separately. But that can show you the power of the models. So having a single place to readily keep track of information on those items, and also giving you that power to more easily tie in your service catalog with your asset management, so you can leverage those items that you already have in stock. So at this point, we are back to Stump the Chump and asking questions. That's all of the demo I have for you today. How should you address if people start with the CMDB but not going to implement asset yet? Assets will automatically create, but do you recommend on implementation that you set all the model categories to enforce CI verification? Yes, I do typically recommend that. Set up that enforce CI verification. That will give you that flexibility when you start to look at asset management to create those asset records when you're ready for them, and then you can bring in the asset-specific information. That was in the Hangout. I'm going to refresh the community. I'll do a quick look at the questions there. I know we are past the top of the hour and want to be understanding with people's time. Okay, don't see any additional questions there. And so I will finish things off here. We did a little Stump the Chump. If you've got additional questions, I will post some additional resources to the event page related to models and assets and CIs. It'll pretty much be questions that have come up in the community that have been addressed or answered in some format that are related to these items, and also some blog posts and perhaps a couple of wiki articles. Do feel free to ask more questions on the event page. So if you've gotten to this recording through some other means besides the community, and you need to go there, there's the link to the community post, the event on the community. Post your questions there, and I am tracking that, and I will answer those. The ones that I did answer verbally in the session today, I will go back and put together some written up responses as well for you. So thank you for joining today. I will do one last check to see if there are any questions. And if not, then we will call it a day. And again, thank you for joining the Ask the Expert session today and for being a part of the community. We do appreciate you following along, and hope we answered your questions today, and hope